There is a moment in the history of the Second World War that almost no one talks about. It is January 1942. Britain and Germany are locked in a brutal war. Thousands of men are dying every week. And inside the British House of Commons, Prime Minister Winston Churchill stands up and says something that shocks the entire chamber into silence.
We have a very daring and skillful opponent against us, and may I say, across the havoc of war, a great general.
He was not talking about a British officer. He was not talking about an ally. He was talking about a German. He was talking about Erwin Rommel. That is the man this documentary is about. A general so brilliant, so dangerous, and so respected that his enemies openly praised him while he was actively trying to destroy them. A man who rose from a schoolteacher's son to the most feared military commander in the world. A man who outthought entire armies with fewer tanks, less fuel, and almost no support from his own side. And a man who was ultimately destroyed not by the Allies, but by Adolf Hitler himself. This is the real story of Erwin Rommel, and it is unlike anything you have been told before. Erwin Johannes Eugen Rommel was born on November 15, 1891, in Heidenheim, a quiet town in the Kingdom of Württemberg in southern Germany. His father was a schoolmaster. His mother was the daughter of a local government official. There was nothing in his background to suggest greatness. No military dynasty, no aristocratic blood, no obvious destiny. He was a quiet, physically small boy, pale, blue-eyed, and serious. As a teenager, he was fascinated by mathematics and engineering. He wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. His father pushed him toward the military instead. At 18, he joined the Württemberg Infantry Regiment as an officer cadet, and within months, it became clear to everyone around him that something unusual lived inside this quiet young man. Rommel did not fight the way he was taught. He thought faster than the textbooks. He moved when others waited. He attacked when others consolidated. He had an instinct for the weakness in an enemy position that his instructors could not explain and could not teach. World War I gave him his first stage. In 1917, at the Battle of Caporetto in Italy, Lieutenant Rommel led a small force of 600 men through Italian mountain defenses and captured 9,000 prisoners and 81 guns in less than 2 days. He was 25 years old. He received Germany's highest military honor, the Pour le Mérite. The world did not yet know his name, but the war had shown Rommel something about himself that he would spend the next 27 years proving to everyone else. Speed kills, hesitation is death, and the man who moves first wins. When the Second World War began in 1939, Rommel was a relatively senior officer, but not yet a household name. He commanded Hitler's personal bodyguard division during the invasion of Poland. He was precise, disciplined, and effective, but Poland was a short campaign, and his role was limited. Then came France, and everything changed. In February 1940, Hitler gave Rommel command of the 7th Panzer Division, an armored tank unit. Rommel had never commanded tanks before. He had spent his career in the infantry. His own subordinates quietly questioned the appointment. They would not question it for long. When Germany launched its devastating assault on France and the Low Countries in May 1940, Rommel's 7th Panzer moved so fast and so far into French territory that his own headquarters lost contact with him repeatedly. He advanced so deep, so quickly, that the French had no idea where he was. Neither, at times, did the Germans. The French troops who encountered him could not understand what was happening. He appeared behind their lines before they had finished retreating from his last position. He captured generals who thought they were safely behind the front. He moved at night when armies were supposed to stop. The French called his unit the Ghost Division. In 6 weeks, France fell. In those 6 weeks, Rommel's 7th Panzer suffered fewer than 2,600 casualties while capturing over 97,000 prisoners and advancing further than any other German division. Hitler noticed. Europe noticed. What came next would make Rommel a legend. North Africa, 1941. The British had been fighting the Italians in Libya and were winning comfortably. Italy's forces were collapsing. The desert campaign looked nearly over. Britain's generals were already thinking about what came next. Then Rommel arrived with his Africa Corps. He was supposed to stabilize the Italian position. Hold the line. Buy time. Those were his orders from Berlin. He ignored them within 48 hours. Rommel attacked before he was ready, before his full force had even arrived, because he understood something his orders did not account for. The British were expecting a defensive enemy. The moment of psychological surprise was worth more than waiting for the perfect moment that might never come. Within 2 months, he had pushed the British back across the entire length of Libya and had the Africa Corps sitting on the Egyptian border, almost within reach of the Suez Canal, the single most important strategic target in the entire Middle Eastern theater. The British generals sent against him fell one after another. Rommel studied their patterns, predicted their responses, and moved before they could react. He drove at the front personally, in a command vehicle at the edge of his advancing columns, seeing the battlefield with his own eyes rather than waiting for reports to filter back. His men worshipped him. Even British soldiers captured by his forces reported being treated with surprising respect. Rommel forbade the mistreatment of prisoners. He openly disobeyed Hitler's brutal commando order to execute captured special forces and ensured that all prisoners, regardless of their background, were treated according to the rules of war. In a war defined by its systematic brutality, Rommel conducted his campaign with a code of conduct that his enemies acknowledged publicly. The British gave him his name, the Desert Fox. They meant it as a warning. It became immortality. By the summer of 1942, Rommel had been promoted to Field Marshal, the highest military rank in Germany. At 50 years old, he was one of the youngest and most rapidly promoted field marshals of the entire Second World War. He stood at the absolute peak of his power and reputation. But the desert was beginning to work against him, in ways no general could outthink. His supply lines were stretched across thousands of miles of hostile terrain. The British had cracked the German Enigma code and were reading his communications, knowing his requests for fuel and ammunition before they arrived. The American entry into the war had flooded the Allied side with resources that Germany simply could not match. At the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, British General Bernard Montgomery launched a massive coordinated offensive against Rommel, who was outnumbered in men, tanks, fuel, and air support. Rommel was not even in Africa when the battle began. He was in Germany, ill and recovering. He flew back immediately. He could not stop what was coming. For 12 days, Rommel fought one of the most tactically brilliant defensive battles of the entire war. He stretched the British offensive for nearly 2 weeks, despite being catastrophically outgunned. But mathematics eventually defeats genius. On November 4th, the line broke. The retreat across North Africa began. It would not stop until Tunisia, where in May 1943, the Africa Corps, the force Rommel had built and bled for, surrendered to the Allies. Rommel was already gone. Hitler had recalled him to Europe. The desert chapter was over. But the most dangerous chapter of Rommel's life was just beginning. By 1944, Rommel was commanding the defense of Western Europe, preparing for the Allied invasion that everyone knew was coming. He was in charge of the Atlantic Wall, the vast network of fortifications along the French coastline. But something else was happening inside Rommel's mind. The man, who had served Germany faithfully for 30 years, was watching his country being consumed by a war he now knew was unwinnable. Rumors of the regime's horrific crimes were filtering back to him, and he saw Hitler override sound military judgment again and again, costing hundreds of thousands of German lives with decisions that defied every military reality on the ground. In the shadows, members of the German resistance began sounding Rommel out. They believed the famous Desert Fox was the only man respected enough by both sides to save Germany from total destruction. He did not agree to assassinate Hitler. That detail matters. Rommel favored a negotiated peace over an assassination, believing that killing Hitler would only create a martyr. His mere association with the plotters, his name spoken under torture by men trying to survive Gestapo interrogation, was enough to mark him for death. He never got the chance to act on it. On July 17, 1944, 3 days before the assassination attempt on Hitler known as Operation Valkyrie, Rommel's staff car was attacked by British fighter planes on a French road. He was thrown from the vehicle and suffered a massive skull fracture. He was rushed to the hospital, unconscious, and nearly died. When the July 20th plot failed and the Gestapo began pulling the conspiracy apart, Hitler faced a problem. Rommel was the most beloved German military figure in the country. Putting him on trial would be a propaganda disaster. Executing him publicly was unthinkable. So Hitler sent 2 generals to Rommel's home with a private offer. October 14, 1944, Herrlingen, Germany. Erwin Rommel is at home, still recovering from his injuries. He is 52 years old. His wife Lucy and his teenage son Manfred are in the house. 2 generals arrive. They tell him that Hitler knows about his involvement in the conspiracy. They give him a choice. He can face a people's court, the same court that had been publicly humiliating and executing the other conspirators on film. His family will be arrested. His name will be destroyed. Or he can take the cyanide capsule they have brought with them. He will be given a state funeral. He will be declared a hero, killed by his wounds. His family will be protected. His reputation will survive. Rommel went upstairs. He said goodbye to his wife. He told his son what was happening. He put on his field marshal's uniform, pinned on his military medals, and he walked outside. He was dead within 15 minutes. The German public was told Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had died of his wounds from the July air attack. He was given the full state funeral Hitler had promised. The streets of Germany were filled with mourners. None of them knew the truth. His son Manfred, who was standing in the driveway when the car drove away, knew. His wife Lucy knew. And the 2 generals who handed him the poison knew. The rest of the world would not find out for years. Here is what history ultimately has to reckon with when it comes to Erwin Rommel. He never officially joined the Nazi Party, but he was far from detached from it. He was a personal favorite of Adolf Hitler, allowed the Nazi propaganda machine to turn him into a national idol, and used Hitler's backing to bypass the old Prussian military establishment that resented him. He refused criminal orders in the field and treated prisoners with dignity. He ultimately turned against the regime he had served and paid for it with his life. But he also served that regime brilliantly for years. His genius in the desert extended the war in North Africa by 2 years. Those 2 years cost thousands of Allied lives. There is no separating Rommel's brilliance from the machinery he was brilliantly serving. That contradiction is what makes him one of the most studied, most debated, and most fascinating military figures of the 20th century. He was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was something far more difficult and far more human than either of those labels. He was a soldier who was extraordinary at war, who served the wrong side, who eventually understood that, and who died for the understanding. The Desert Fox did not fall in battle. He was murdered in a country lane by the government he had spent his life serving. And that, more than any battle, more than any victory or defeat, is the truth about Erwin Rommel. If this story hit you, subscribe and drop a comment below. Was Rommel a great man who served an evil cause, or does serving that cause make him part of it? See you in the next one.